Welcome to Take Your Medicine podcast. Today, we're going to talk about a pharmacist that doesn't sleep. We're going to talk about me. So, this podcast was all based on the idea that maybe we can learn from each other. And so, I thought I would tell you about how me, a pharmacist who's had access to anything in the world to help him sleep, has probably struggled worse than almost everybody else I know. So, my name's Phil. I'm a pharmacist, been doing it for 25 years. And today, I want to tell you how it all started. So, I don't think I've slept since, I remember as far back as 8 years old. When I was about 8, we lived in Green River, Wyoming. I don't know if you've ever been to Green River, Wyoming. If not, no offense to anybody there, I would just keep driving. But there is cool places all the way around it. Actually, I really loved Green River because they had lots of horned toads. And for me, I got to play outside. But one thing that happened I was there is I got moved downstairs. So my older brother, who's a couple of years older than me, he was upstairs. He didn't want to move downstairs. My dad said, "Will you do it?" Now, I'm kind of a people pleaser, and I don't know if you've registered that or not, but you'll find out I was a people pleaser. So I said, sure. And there I was at 8 years old, and it was a split entry house. So you'd go downstairs and then you'd have to walk across the huge empty space that was the family room that was unfinished, and my room was on the far end. I remember the first night that I slept in there, I couldn't fall asleep. I was scared. And I remember my dad was watching MASH above, and I knew that my dad watched the news and then MASH and then went to bed, which is a pretty common thing. Every kid from the 80s all has the same memory of hearing the MASH song, knowing that in a moment you're going to be terribly alone in your basement and nobody was going to be around. And it might as well been like 3 blocks away. Well, first night I didn't sleep. Second night I didn't sleep. My dad probably had a lot of patience, but as a child, you don't remember how many times you went out and they were very consoling. What you remember is the one single time he went out there and he yelled, "Get back to bed." And so from that moment on, kind of struggled a lot with sleep. And it followed me through my entire life. I went on an LDS mission to Korea. There were times in Korea where I wouldn't sleep for 3 days in a row. And so you would just be up all night by yourself. And you get this panic effect that happens to almost everybody. And anybody that's ever had insomnia, you know what I'm talking about. You're laying in bed, you've been trying to fall asleep for the last 30 minutes, maybe hour, and your head starts to get like hot. And then your legs are touching together too much. And then you get itchy. And then you get out of bed. And then you get angry. And then you try to settle back down. This went on for most of my life. And there was a time where the first thing, and this is why I want to talk about this. It's like going to a hairdresser with a bad haircut. This is a pharmacist that should be able to knock you out. And I'm going to tell you, for the most part, none of them really worked for me. But let's go through all the medications, and maybe some of this will help you so you know what to expect from them. So the very first thing I tried was Benadryl. So Benadryl is an antihistamine. Generally speaking, histamine is the thing that we get in the morning. So when we go to sleep at night, the sun goes down. When it hits the right angle, we release melatonin. That melatonin is supposed to slow us down, and it does a few other things. So it gets rid of some of the histamine effects, starts dropping the amount of norepinephrine that we have, all those excitatory things. And then the next thing that it does for you is it starts to hit the GABA receptors. That's what melatonin does at night. But in the morning, when the sun comes up, one of the things that are supposed to wake you up is histamine. Histamine is an excitatory neurotransmitter. We get histamine, we get excited, we get alert, we get awake. When we take an antihistamine, the antihistamine gets rid of that gas that we have. So it's the gas to get us running. A lot of us run really heavy with a lot of gas, like all day long. Our minds are always moving really rapidly. Caffeine always works for us. We can't sleep at all. And histamine is part of the problem there. So when you take an antihistamine like Benadryl, like I did while I was in college, the good news is that your brain would slow down for a few weeks, but you'd wake up with cankers or dry mouth. Your nose would be dry because it has an anti-muscarinic effect, which means that everything that's supposed to be wet is now dry. But the bigger problem is that because you block that histamine, the next morning you woke up groggy. And I was in pharmacy school. I was trying to drive to school in the morning. And honestly, there were sections of the road I was forgetting that I would even driven. And so it got me scared enough I quit taking Benadryl altogether. To this day, Benadryl is still a very effective way for me to get 2 or 3 nights of sleep. But after the third day, I start to get a little bit of a tolerance to it. Then I get to wake up in the morning groggy, but I'm still not falling asleep very rapidly. Now, after I got through pharmacy school, I decided I got a lot of friends. They were a lot of doctors. We had a lot of prescriptions. And they said, well, let's get you on melatonin. Now, melatonin is supposed to be naturally secreted from your brain in this gland. It's called the pineal gland, and it releases it. And when it does it, it has that whole cascade of effects. And it's really cool because when the sunlight hits your eyes right at the right angle, it stimulates it, like it's like the sun comes and says, "Okay, I'm going down." But we all live now inside, and not only that, but the sun, depending on where you're at, the sun moves around. So when the melatonin hits, my brain doesn't really like it very much. In fact, I've learned now because of sleep anxiety. So sleep anxiety is the idea that you know you have to fall asleep soon, and your brain says, "Oh, no." And when we do that, when we have that anxiety, it actually alerts us. It releases more dopamine or dopamine-seeking behaviors. My favorite, mine personally favorite, is I eat. So I know that I'm getting stressed about falling to sleep because about 30 minutes before I go to sleep, I am now foraging even though I'm not hungry. That's my brain saying you're starting to get anxious because you're gonna have to go to bed, and so go eat. So those people that always say, "Don't ever eat after 10 o'clock," they obviously don't have sleep anxiety because you can't help yourself because you're looking for dopamine type activities. Phones have been a nightmare for me because on the one hand, it's like changed my life. I really love it. The dopamine of creating has been great. But on the other hand, it's like stimulating my brain with more dopamine, which keeps me awake. So because of the dopamine effects, when I take melatonin, the melatonin starts to put the brakes on, but the gas is still going. So what ends up happening is I sort of fall asleep, but then when I wake up in the morning, I am just angry. I am just a bear because all night long, my brain was trying to go and stop at the same time. And so my wife, after taking melatonin for a few weeks, she just told me, "You've got to come off of it." And quite honestly, melatonin gives me some of the weirdest dreams. And if you look at the fact that melatonin does kind of lean into our serotonin, the way that melatonin goes through, it leans into making more serotonin. It would obviously start to mess with moods fairly substantially. After melatonin, I jumped into just GABA. GABA is it's an amino acid that you can just purchase. We utilize GABA in our brains in order to fall asleep. But the process of taking GABA, having it hit your stomach, and then getting absorbed and getting back up to your brain is kind of a long process. I do get fairly good results out of GABA, especially when GABA is in combination with melatonin, because I can use a lot smaller dose of melatonin and I'm not as angry, and it seems to be a whole lot more efficient. And L-theanine is the next one I moved to. So GABA is one type of amino acid, and L-theanine is another one. Now, L-theanine really supports the way that we're supposed to naturally fall asleep. It helps us with mood, with anxiety. It helps all of those things because it does stimulate everything that slows our system down. So L-theanine and GABA, I kind of lean into, but what I find is that helps me slam the brakes more, but it doesn't help at all with my sleep anxiety. So it's almost like I've got a duality of insomnia that are fighting with each other. On one hand, I don't really fall asleep easily, so it always has taken me longer to fall asleep. My wife, on the other hand, her head hits the pillow and she's gonzo. But when I hit the pillow, I already know that it's a process. And I also know that I have a window. This is the other thing. Anybody who's got insomnia knows you have a window. You turn off the TV, you have everything off, and you're starting to fall asleep. And boom, that's right when my wife always wants to start talking to me. Like, "Oh no, if you talk to me right now, you're going to fall right to sleep." And then I'm up. And, but then I also really like talking to my wife. So I end up talking to her. And so there's a lot of nights like last night. I think I was up till about 2 last night, and you're up, like you're awake and your brain goes through all these scenarios. Like I write novels a lot of nights. And when I take the GABA and the L-theanine and the melatonin, it does make me groggy. Like I do get sleepy with it, but I don't fall asleep. So then in the end, it's just kind of like you lay down for a nap and didn't get it. And so I get super irritated on that. And then I wake up even honer in the morning. Well, the next one I moved to, which is one that a lot of people move to, is Trazodone. Now, Trazodone is a tricyclic antidepressant. It's a second generation, so it's a little bit older. Trazodone does a couple of things because it does help relax you a little bit. Trazodone, with the tricyclic antidepressant effect, it helps kind of release some of that anxiety. It's not super proficient because most people take 25 milligrams to maybe 50 milligrams. And really, to get Trazodone to work as an antidepressant, you've got to push the dose to 100 to 200 milligrams. But it does help take that edge off. However, the antihistamine effect of Trazodone made it almost unbearable for me because it has that same Benadryl type. And when I say Benadryl, it also includes like your Unisom, because that's doxylamine, which doxylamine is like diphenhydramine. So Unisom is like Benadryl. The only real difference there is doxylamine crosses into the brain a little bit better, and it has a little less side effects when it comes to the dryness. but it's still working to stop that histamine, and so does Trazodone. So I took Trazodone, but I am just groggy the next day. And I kind of live in a world, you don't want your pharmacist groggy the next morning. You don't want your bus driver groggy the next. I don't know who you can have be groggy the next morning. Maybe the guy taking your tickets can be a little groggy. I don't know. But you really don't want, I didn't want to have that groggy feeling. So I quit taking it. And for the longest time, what I would do is I'd go through cycles where I was up, and for anybody who's dealt with insomnia, when I say the monsters come out at night, you know what I'm talking about. I remember so many nights, you'd get so angry, you'd be laying in bed and, my wife's over there sleeping and there I was, like wide awake. And everything that could go wrong in the world was going wrong in my head. Like everything. I would worry about everything. I'd worry about nothing. I'd worry about things that couldn't be. I would worry like 6 layers deep. What if, what if, what if? Because of all that insomnia and that worrying, I end up having a contingency plan for everything. Like, honestly, if doomsdayers got nothing on me, I got a plan for everything. But the hardest thing is that emotionally, it drains you so much that you don't act like a sane person. And what I find is that I get 2 nights of poor sleep, and then the 3rd night I get natural good sleep. And that was better than taking, I tried amitriptyline, which is in the same family as Trazodone. It's a tricyclic antidepressant. I tried nortriptyline. As you can tell, that's a tricyclic antidepressant. And I was really hesitant to move to anything that was a controlled substance. As a pharmacist, you kind of get nervous about any controlled substances because, anything that has an addiction potential, you live in the candy store. And so I was like, "Oh, I don't wanna go to it," but it got bad enough. So during this time, I now had a couple of kids. I had kinda gone through, I'd kinda coped my way through it. Some days I'd sleep, some days I wouldn't sleep. Some days I'd pick a fight with my wife right before bed because I was looking for dopamine, and I didn't realize that the insomnia was affecting everything around me. And at some point, I was like, "I have to reestablish sleep patterns." I sat down with a doctor and we started zolpidem. Now, zolpidem, it hits the GABA receptor, but it only hits 2 of the subunits. So there's 4 units that you turn on and off on the GABA receptor. Again, GABA receptor puts you to sleep. And if you really hit it, rather than just leaning into it like you do with the L-theanine and the GABA and even the melatonin, when you really hit it, it's like a hard stop. They started out with benzodiazepines. Now, those are like your Xanaxes, your alprazolam, or your lorazepam. Those ones hit almost all 4 units, and so what you ended up getting is getting a lot more full sedation from it, and the sleep quality wasn't quite as good. And those ones really make me nervous because I saw so many people on benzodiazepines who could never come off of them. But you look at zolpidem, it's got a 4-hour half-life, which means it knocks you out. It won't keep you to sleep, but it knocks you out, and that's really my problem is I couldn't fall asleep because of the sleep anxiety. And so I got some, and I would use it occasionally, and then I would stop because it made me so nervous. And it would put me to sleep, but I wasn't convinced that I was waking up the next morning refreshed. Like, I was out, I was gone. I mean, you think of like Michael Jackson where you're putting propofol in them because your eyes closed. And you start considering, okay, but if I really look at, am I getting a higher quality of sleep? I couldn't say that with Ambien, but I did know that it was treating my sleep anxiety. And so I would take it because I would get so worked up. I get more questions about weight loss drugs than anything else right now. Are they safe? Can I stay on them for long term? And yeah, I have a few concerns because you have to ask yourself, why did we need the shot in the first place? Our bodies produce GLP-1 inside the L cells, and those are found inside your small intestine. Whatever you could do to help those L cells produce its own GLP would be immensely important. And in this case, Triquetra's got GLP-Activate. GLP-Activate combines multiple products in order to help your own L cells be the healthiest they can. And when the L cell's happy, you put out your own GLP and you don't have to take those shots. It also puts the amount that your body's used to having so you can go back to the way it was. GLP-Activate. So you want to go right now to triquetrahealth.com and put in code GLP120. Get your GLP-Activate, figure out what's going on in there instead of just trying to overwhelm it. Again, as a pharmacist, I'm supposed to be the one telling you what to do or not to do. I'm supposed to know all this stuff. And I would always come into work and people would ask me about sleep and I'd like sigh. I'm like, I don't know. Let's talk about it. And so I took Ambien for quite a while and it would knock me out. I'd wake up in the morning And a lot of people say, oh, you got to be careful because you'll become dependent on it. And anybody with insomnia are like, yeah, I know, I'm already dependent. I was dependent on it before I started taking it. Like, yeah, but then you won't be able to fall asleep if you stop taking it. I'm like, I wasn't falling asleep before. So I had all those conversations with people, but I didn't believe it. Like the idea of not being able to sleep was pretty terrifying because I was working a lot of hours. So I have 4 boys. I ran my own pharmacy for years. I actually just recently am not running it anymore, but I still do own part of another pharmacy. So I'm still a pharmacy owner. But for years, I had to be up in the morning, and my wife takes care of the kids. And so one of the things that I tried to do is she likes to sleep in the morning. So I was up with the kids for most of the school year. Like I would be up 3 or 4 times and then she'd get up 2 times, maybe once a week. And I was trying to do that because I was gone all day and the hours were bad. So I was taking Ambien for that period of time, and all of the things you hear about Ambien are true. So because Ambien only hits 2 out of 4 GABA receptors, it makes all those weird behaviors. Like I would wake up with Nutella all over me and not remember eating it. I don't really have a problem with that because when I eat Nutella and I'm awake, it's all over me. So there really wasn't like a huge concern on my end that I was waking up with it. And I never did anything. But then when you had those gaps, I'm like, okay, this isn't great. So then I moved to where I tried to take Ambien less and less, and I tried to mix in the other items. And quite honestly, that's been my struggle now. Well, I'm 50, and so we started when I was 8 with this whole thing, and now I'm 50, and I'm still, like, fighting with it. In the long run, since you're listening, I really think the best way for everybody to handle it is to know how each individual item works. So there are times where I know before I go to bed that I am just anxious. And I know that that bed scares me because I did try all of them. Like, if you want to go through it, I did Sonata. I mean, I tried them all. And every single one of them, because the Sonata's in the same family as the Ambien is. And then you've got Rosarum, which is just melatonin that's been cleaned up a little bit. And then you've got the extended release Ambien, and you've got with Lunesta. Lunesta's in the same family as Ambien. And then you can try Restoril, which is temazepam, and it's back in the benzodiazepam family. And so we've got all these things we hit. And what I found for me is the best thing for me to have is, first of all, have a good mindset that I may not sleep that night. And whatever I say or think at 2 a.m., it doesn't count the next day. The next thing I found out was that most people who have insomnia feel scared and alone and ashamed. So 1 out of 3 Americans have some level of insomnia. Insomnia to a point where you're not sleeping on a regular basis, it's 1 out of 5, 1 out of 7. So I've always thought it would just be really cool if we had a way that we could just turn on the lights so you know somebody else out there has the monsters coming after you. Because I've had some of the worst thoughts in my life at 2 o'clock in the morning feeling all alone. And it's been scary. Like, it's actually kind of a scary little process when you're there alone. So just know, reach out and find other people who have insomnia. For some reason, it makes you feel good that you're part of a group. The other thing I tell myself is that there are times for melatonin. So melatonin, when I'm having a really bad run, I'll commit to melatonin for 2 weeks at the same time, and I will try to go to bed exactly the same time, and I'll turn everything off, and I'll try to reestablish patterns. Our brains are very aplastic, meaning that they're usually pretty malleable. The older I get, the less malleable it is. So in order to make a pathway stick, you have to give it some time. I'm not a big fan of pushing the dose of melatonin real high because I don't think that that's the plan. I'm a bigger fan of making sure I'm not doing dopamine seeking behaviors, and my brain knows it's now 9 o'clock, we're going to do this, which I'd love to say I go to bed at 9 o'clock, but it's actually closer to midnight. So committing to melatonin for 2 weeks when I've had a bad run where it's 4 out of 5 nights I'm not sleeping or whatever it is, that's a huge push for me.
Life has never moved faster than it does right now. Can you imagine a time where everything happens in 15 to 90-second increments? No wonder our brains are overtaxed, and there's no wonder why everybody's looking for a solution to that. When I look for solutions for cognition to keep up with brain health, I always think acetylcholine before I think stimulants. More caffeine usually doesn't solve any of the problems. Avantera has Elevate. Now, in Elevate, they have specifically designed it to help with focus, memory, and learning rather than just more stimulant. So AvanteraHealth.com, put in Take Your Medicine as the code, save some money. This product has been amazing to me. The focus was there without all the jittery. AvanteraHealth.com, Take Your Medicine as the code. I love this stuff.
There are times where I'm extraordinarily anxious because of life circumstance. I reserve Benadryl more Unisom for the few days where I know that it is extraordinarily early. I'm really anxious and I don't have to get up the next morning. If I had that in place, if I take Benadryl, and remember with melatonin, this is something I always tell people, it takes 40 minutes for it to kick in. So don't take melatonin and jump into bed. Like take melatonin, then brush your teeth and do all that stuff because you have to absorb that in the bottom half of your digestive tract. With Benadryl, I'll use it for 3 days when I know that it's more sleep anxiety than it is just not being able to sleep. But I have to have the next day to be groggy. And I only use it for maybe 2 days in a row. Because if I use it for 2 days in a row, I'll get my sleep. I know that maybe the next night I won't sleep real well, but I've had a couple of good days of sleep. And so my mental state is clear and I'm not quite as anxious. And as Ambien goes, Ambien is the rescue for me still. I keep it around. I don't like using it because I did find that over time I needed higher and higher doses. And that was concerning to me. So it's one of those things I have. It's almost like that ace that you've got hidden just in case. If you use it every night, it quits becoming useful as a sleep aid. And so what you want to do is you want to utilize it when you really need to. And because its onset is about 15 to 20 minutes, that's something you can take at like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I do the math. I'm like, okay, in 6 hours, I have to be at work. And I know I'm not supposed to drive for 6 hours. So at 1 o'clock, I don't have to be up till 7. It's fine. And so it just depends on when I have to be up. And the last thing I would tell people is I would start looking and saying, how do I feel the next morning? And as soon as you start putting your brain into position that sleep, just having your eyes closed, and sleep, waking up refreshed in the morning, will feel completely different. For anybody that has insomnia, when you have a good night's sleep and you wake up in that warm bed and you've just slept good, that next morning is like the angels have welcomed you into heaven. Like it was just the best feeling in the world. You won't get that if you're constantly dosing yourself with more and more medications. One of them that they've pushed really heavy in the last few years is Seroquel, quetiapine. But they actually did a study on that just came out a few weeks ago that showed that quetiapine doesn't help after 2 weeks and that it can give you the reverse effect. So it helps for a little while and then it actually can make things worse. And so I always like to empower people. And as a pharmacist that doesn't sleep, here I am just letting you know that each one of those medications have a place. There's a tool in them and you utilize them as best you can. This is Take Your Medicine podcast. My name's Philip Cowley, and that's my sleep journey or lack of sleep journey. I always end every one of my podcasts with a question to my guest, and there's no guest. So today I'll just ask myself, what's the one thing you would do to make the world nicer? And my answer is believe in people. Because honestly, there is good in every single person. If you start looking at them to see what they could be, rather than what you saw the first time, you start realizing how amazing the world is around you. And be careful because it's super contagious once you realize how cool people are. Thanks for listening. If you have a minute, hey, share this, follow us, do the whole thing. My name's Phil Cowley. This was Take Your Medicine podcast.